Have you ever been working with a member of staff in care and they've decided to remove a cup or some other fragile object, and a few minutes later there's been an incident, and when after the incident you talk to that member of staff and you say, why did you choose to remove the cup? They say, well, you could just tell. There was an atmosphere. And they're vague about what actually they witnessed. If you're an employer or registered manager working in care and you're having incident after incident, and those staff after the incidents turn around and say, well, you could just tell there was an atmosphere, but they don't give you anything more concrete. It's very vague in what they give you. This video is for you because we are going to provide you with an exercise where you can make your staff communicate that information in such a clearer way that you can actually create consistency within the staff group. So you know what to look for, so you can intervene in incidents before they happen, therefore reducing incidents. So to give an example of why details are so important at a granular level, I'm working with this guy, I'm sitting beside him watching TV, and a member of staff who knew him much better than me stood in the doorway looking uncomfortable. Now I thought we were getting on well, sitting down watching TV, and we were interacting okay, and I didn't think much of it. Over the next maybe 40 seconds or a minute, I got to the point in our interaction on the sofa where I suddenly realized he's showing me a sign that he's not comfortable. And I said, would you like me to give you some space? And he went, yes. And I went, okay. And I walked out the door. When I walked out the door and I collected the member of staff and we walked off into another room so that he couldn't hear us, we had a private conversation. And we're having a conversation about why she was looking so concerned in the doorway. And she was predicting that there was going to be an incident. But when she was predicting that there was going to be an incident, she couldn't tell me why. Now, I had actually removed myself from the situation because the person in question had done this, which was actually on the plan. That was a sign that I needed to move, give him some space. When I had the conversation with her, she couldn't put her finger on it. She was going, well, there was an atmosphere. You could just tell. You could tell that there was going to be a problem. And what we actually found, with a lot of discussion and some other staff involved, was that he was doing this earlier in this process. And this is what we call the response hierarchy. When you're actually finding a situation where you are upset, you start to show certain signs that you're uncomfortable. Once you start to show those signs that you're uncomfortable, if you don't feel heard, if the people that you're trying to express that to aren't responding, then you end up upping the ante and becoming more upset. And essentially, this response hierarchy, in his terms, was I knew about this because it was in the plan, but I didn't know about this. Are you an employer or a registered manager working in care, dealing with incident after incident and finding staff get disillusioned and leave? And when staff leave, they're replaced by other staff, and those staff are trained in the same systems, and 3 months later you have the same problem where you have the same turnover of staff? My name is Des Cook. I'm a behavioural analyst. I've taught tens of thousands of people how to deal with relationships and build relationships with the most complex people in our industry. What we have for you is a system that reduces staff turnover and improves those bad relationships that people have that lead to incidents. We do this by assisting staff to understand how to be more emotionally resilient, to understand how to use behavioural language and why that is so important, to understand why data collection is so important, and to understand how to assist each other with their emotional states through those rough times. If you are doing the same thing and expecting different results, and you still have incidents happening, you still have relationships that are poor, and you still have staff leaving, click the link below. As an example, Netflix has this thing where they call it Surprise Me. And when you do Surprise Me, you have buttons on the screen, and imagine your partner's got the control, and every time something comes up, it plays for sort of 40 seconds or a minute before all the buttons fade away and the program continues. And your partner keeps on pressing next, next. Imagine getting to the point where you turn around to your partner and say something like, oh, that looked interesting. And then it becomes things like, I was watching that. And then it becomes things like, can we keep it on one thing, please? And then you get to the point whereby you're so annoyed as they continue to go next, that you turn around and you say something like, right, I think it's my turn to hold the remote control now, don't you? In that moment, they've suddenly realized there's an issue, and they turn around and they go, ooh, and they say, well, you can have the remote control when you calm down and behave like an adult. You now have an incident, but what's happened is you've moved through a response hierarchy of trying to get your needs met by trying to subtly get your point across. If the person had responded earlier in that response hierarchy, then you could have had a civil conversation rather than now having some sort of domestic incident over the remote control. Essentially, people show you that they're uncomfortable with things that are happening. If we don't respond to that, if they don't feel heard, then they're actually going to show you a bigger behavior to try and get that message across. Therefore, going back to our friend, we have this issue whereby the staff need to be clear about the difference between this and this. Because if we can behaviorally define that and have it clearly in the plan, staff know to intervene or to back away, dependent on what the plan says, at an earlier stage in the person's response hierarchy. This will reduce incidents. And if we can reduce incidents, we can improve quality of life and everything else falls into place. So thinking about an exercise that we could do, all the staff that are involved in working with this particular individual have different pieces of knowledge, different relationships with him. And therefore, we need to get all of them together and have that conversation in such a way that they feel psychologically safe to disagree, psychologically safe to say the things that most people are being quiet about because their fear of judgment stops them from actually saying certain things. When we can get all that information out, we can put it into a hierarchy and discuss how the hierarchy works, and we can also create responses to each of those things that staff can then do or try whenever they're placed in that situation. So when we've gathered the whole team, we're going to actually get them to express those little bits of knowledge. We're going to get them to write all that kind of information down in separate things so that we can put them together into a response hierarchy and have a clear understanding of where people are on their response hierarchy when they're displaying that particular precursor behavior. Once we have done that, we can then agree on how we respond to each of those behaviors. And when we agree to how we respond to each of those behaviors and staff do it together, we get much more consistency of approach, which helps us to reduce incidents. This becomes a robust, ordered list of data that's in the heads of staff on a daily basis, and we've got it out of their heads, and now the plan writer has a clear indication of what they can use and how they can structure that. In terms of what we should be writing down, we need to be behavioural in the way we express ourselves around these particular subjects. There is no point in saying he got moody. There's no point in saying he got aggressive, because those terms don't actually tell another member of staff what to look for. And they actually are detrimental to our industry in a completely different way, which is another video. What we need to do is we need to actually have those staff be really clear on what they are seeing. It's catchphrase, say what you see. So his shoulders clench, his fists clench, his eyebrows change, his cheeks go red. The whole point about this is his breathing goes shallow. Those sorts of things are things that are what we call observable, measurable behavior. And if you can create those things written as clear, observable, measurable behavior, then a brand new member of staff who's never met him before can walk in, pick up a plan and read what to look for and how to respond to it. And that is like gold dust. Human beings actually find communicating in a behavioural way quite difficult without some sort of base training and understanding of behavioural language. We can, however, teach people how to do that. And when we teach people how to do that, which improves their ability to plan, we end up creating plans which give consistency, which can reduce incidents because people start to intervene earlier in the process. And when people intervene earlier in the process, incidents don't even need to happen. one of the problems in our industry is people are very clear at taking data on all the things that go wrong. They're very clear at taking data on incidents. They're very clear at taking data on, oh, that was a major incident, we had to have 6 staff involved, or whatever it may be. If we're going to get good at this, we need to actually start taking data on whenever we see something on the response hierarchy that we interact with correctly and it doesn't lead to an incident. And staff need to get credit for the fact that if they're doing that kind of work really well and they're building those relationships really well and they're meeting those needs really well and incidents aren't happening, then that's a good data point that we need to help staff to see they're achieving. People are far too interested in just recording all the negative stuff. If we want to see how these plans are working and see how they move forward, we need to be recording all the good outcomes that are happening when we're following them. If you're still watching at the end of this video, what can you take away from this? You could, in the next few days, get a few staff together, have a conversation around how to use behavioural language and how precursors are so important that we need to define them, and therefore if we can make a bit of a response hierarchy, we can help those staff to understand how to intervene earlier in that person's process so they feel heard, so the incident doesn't happen and the quality of life increases. If you've watched all the way to the end, click the link. You get to see me teach more about this particular subject and you get to understand more about everything we do.